Welcome to Regulatory Ramblings, Briefs. Our guest today has the distinct honor of being our first ever repeat guest on either RR Briefs or Regulatory Ramblings. Jamieson Kirkwood is a postdoctoral fellow at HKU's Faculty of Law, and he's written an article with his often collaborator, Julian Chase, entitled Taxing the Future, Digital Stateless Income, Business Organization, and the Search for a New Regulatory Paradigm. This article appeared in the Singapore Journal of Legal Studies. Well, Jamie, thank you for coming back.
Thank you. It's a pleasure to come back.
Good to have you. So, tax is very much in the focus right now with a new administration in Washington, and well, relatively, it's been a couple of years already. But I mean, from day one, the Biden administration said that they wanted to usher in a new tax regime, a fair tax, around the world to prevent people from engaging in tax arbitrage and hopping from one jurisdiction to the next. So, your article brings into focus what it sees as the quote unquote connected issues of free trade, globalization, and state sovereignty. Yet, as we know, nation states actively compete with each other to lure business and high net worth individuals to their shores. How do you pass tax rules then that aren't thwarted by the compelling national interest to lure that money in business?
Okay. Well, I'm not a tax expert, but I do research and focus on the interface between law, technology, which includes obviously financial aspects and tax aspects. Now, thank you for highlighting that this area is very complex and very competitive, with tax regimes all over the world competing with each other. And that was why the OECD and the G20 set up what they called the BEPS project in 2013. And they set up a digital economy task force in 2017, which ultimately led to a two-pillar solution in 2021, which was signed up to by 136 countries, representing over 90% of global trade. The basic problem is that tax has remained national, whereas companies and businesses have gone global. So therefore, there's a mismatch between tax authorities, which are national, and businesses, which are multinational. And businesses have been able to exploit the gaps and the loopholes because tax authorities have not kept pace with developments in business.
Your paper also speaks of the traversing of normative solutions provided so far and still to be provided by both coordinated and unilateral rules and policies. Could you elaborate on what some of those solutions may be? I mean, you spoke just a moment ago about BEPS from the G20 and the OECD.
Yes, well, the coordinated solutions are those agreed multilaterally, or proposed multilaterally, like the UN or the OECD tax treaties, model tax treaties. The OECD also issued guidelines for multinational enterprises. As I mentioned, there was the OECD G20 BEPS project and the two-pillar solution. But there's also unilateral solutions, be they diverted profit taxes, such as in Australia or in the UK. There's significant digital presence taxes, which have been instituted in Israel, in India, in other countries, Indonesia, Slovakia. And finally, there's digital service taxes, which have also been implemented in India, but also France and Italy. Finally, then, there's a few solutions which have been proposed how to address this kind of mismatch I talked about between kind of the new business modus operandi and national backward-looking tax authorities, such as the idea of a digital permanent establishment, methods to tax big data, such as data point pricing. there's also taxation based on value creation rather than value consumption, or the idea of equalization taxes or taxing sales, which is kind of a novelty for tax. The most radical solution I've come across is an idea of taxing the shareholders of multinational enterprises.
I mean, from an equity standpoint, I've heard that in some circles. I mean, taxing the shareholders in an age of rising inequality is what some people have argued. I'm not quite sure how readily it would be adopted. So there's been a fair degree of harmonization of tax rules in some OECD countries. There's been a fair number of, again, turf wars between different national level tax authorities. Competing interests, how can these be resolved?
Right, well, what the paper focuses on is taxing the digital economy. And so I think the BEPS two-pillar solution does make progress. It's not an ideal solution, which we'll talk about later, but there are, steps towards progress. Pillar 1 is reallocation of taxing rights, and Pillar 2 is a global minimum tax. And as part of the BEPS two-pillar solution would be a kind of an agreement not to introduce new digital taxes and also to withdraw the digital taxes where they already exist.
So, the thing about digital stateless income is that, in theory at least, it can be traced and therefore taxed. I mean, the technology exists. So, I guess, is the failure to do so a reflection of regulatory incompetence or lack of political will? I mean, I know that's more of a policy matter at that point.
Right. There has been a move by some countries, as we've talked about, to attempt to capture this, such as the significant digital presence taxes in India, Israel, Indonesia, Slovakia. But this is a complex area, and it's getting increasingly complex as technology evolves. And I think it's essential now there's going to be a coordinated approach multilaterally. And I think there is actually political will there, as demonstrated now by 141 jurisdictions signing up to the BEPS two-pillar solution.
See, the countries you cited, as I understand it, they did it with the aim of streamlining and simplifying their tax systems, with the eye to make it more efficient and cut down on the loopholes. There are a lot of people in this world, in the business community, high net worth individuals. They like the old system. They like the loopholes. They like the gaps in the system. They like the messiness which obscures their activities, which ensures that perhaps they can send their money abroad or not pay as much on domestic taxes. I mean, is that the direction you see the world going in, one of greater transparency and fewer places to hide?
Well, I think that's a big question, and there's a couple of things to be said. Firstly, I think tax havens are going to have more of a kind of a regulation. You will see if you check into it that actually pretty much all tax havens have signed up to this, so including Cayman Islands, BVI, Bahamas, Jersey, Guernsey, Gibraltar, Panama, you name it. So the ones which are outside of that, they're really going to be pariah states. Anyway, 15% is not a huge amount. It's not going to damage irreversibly the business operation of the tax havens. In terms of kind of like regulatory arbitrage, I think it's been shown on what the OECD G20 did by having the BEPS project. They could demonstrate to national tax authorities how much money was being lost allowing kind of arbitrage to occur. So this has now been demonstrated, and there is a will, as I said, 141 countries to do something about this.
Okay. No, I mean the numbers are there. I mean it is sending a message, not notwithstanding the fact there are holdouts. So then we come to the end game. What this new ideal global regulatory framework that you envisage, what would it look like?
We're not there yet.
But aspirationally,
the BEPS 2 solution, it's only a step in that journey. I think ultimately we have to get to a world tax organization. For example, the WTO governs world trade, or the IMF governs international finance, but there's no institutional counterpart in the realm of production.
A moment ago you said that moving forward, tax havens will face greater regulation in the weeks and months and years to come. Given the minimum, that there is the move towards minimum corporate tax in the developed world, are tax havens, I mean, do you see them lingering on? A few vestiges here and there, or are their days numbered?
I think what they'll have to do, tax havens, to compete is to offer more than just low tax.
Right.
They'll have to have, certain things like infrastructure, talent, those kind of things, because just low tax doesn't offer enough anymore.
And indeed, the example of the UAE they're finding is they can't sustain it anymore. They need those things.
The UAE is particularly progressive. Yeah. Hong Kong is also quite good because it knows that it's not going to be hurt by having this 15%. In fact, it's going to gain because Hong Kong can offer so much more in terms of infrastructure and talent.
The other thing that comes to mind is that, coming back to your first point about businesses operate transnationally, tax authorities are national creatures. We've come off a period now of the tax authorities in some of the major OECD countries, certainly the US and the UK, the tax authorities being gutted. I mean, their budgets, their manpower being slashed. And, Biden said he wants to increase the number of people at the IRS, and people threw a fit. But he was only replacing the number that had resigned or retired. There is the issue of manpower at a number of tax authorities, and how much more they need to be resourced. Do you have any thoughts on that? I mean, that if they're going to tackle tax evasion in a global world, one, they need more people. Two, the regulators need to talk to each other.
Yeah, I'm not sure it's a case of having boots on the ground, so to speak.
As the IRS does in Hong Kong.
But it certainly needs to have greater visibility. And one of the initiatives of the BEPS project was to get multinational enterprises to disclose their tax policies and tax planning. So with more disclosure, and also, we're moving into artificial intelligence and blockchain solutions, for tax control and tax planning. So, you won't necessarily need hundreds of people to be doing what could be done theoretically by a small team with these high-tech tools.
That would help make government more efficient and cut down on unnecessary headcount. So, do you have anything to add? Anything you feel we haven't discussed about the nature of BEPS? Or
I just wanted to add a little bit more about what I alluded to earlier, that BEPS is not a perfect solution, it's only a step. And I say this for two reasons. Okay, firstly, it might be a few more years before it actually gets implemented. Now, if you look at Pillar 1, there's meant to be another multilateral framework, multilateral instrument released this year, this summer by the OECD. So it remains to be seen, how the jurisdictions react to that. As regards to Pillar 2, the can keeps getting kicked down the road. For example, Hong Kong was meant to introduce this already this year, but Paul Chan has just announced that he's not going to introduce this before 2025. So therefore, there's some delay. And until now, also the US hasn't announced any plans to comply with this solution whatsoever.
The other thing I hear is the developed world feels that they need to, there need to be some allowances. That yes, uniform tax rules can be good, but Western tax rates in certain developing countries might kill growth. The other thing that I wanted to ask you about is that in the age we're living in, are double taxation agreements, are they passé? Are they relics of the past, or do they still have a valid role to play?
Well, they still have a valid role because they're a step towards kind of the coordination or multilateralization of tax, not just one country doing its own thing. And that's also what the BEPS has tried to deal with. I wanted to also talk about some of the contradictions in the BEPS because it's not perfect. So in Pillar 1, the threshold actually is extremely high. Talking about companies with a turnover of 20 billion euros. And it's been estimated there are only around 80 companies globally that would get affected. That's not very many. And of those, certain companies could even avoid getting caught due to not meeting the profitability requirements. For example, Amazon generally has a profitability of less than 10%, possibly due to R&D expenses, etc. But then it wouldn't be caught by Pillar 1. Also, there's a contradiction because Pillar 1 is targeting kind of like paying more tax in the jurisdictions where sales are made, which sounds good. But then Pillar 2, conversely, is paying more tax where the parent has its domicile. So these are kind of going in opposite directions, which might kind of complicate or convolute the tax system even more.
Can those twin approaches coexist?
Ultimately, they're steps in the right direction. They can coexist, but the devil will be in the detail, and I think there's still a lot more to do.
Well, Jamie, thank you again for joining us.
Thank you very much.
And to our viewers, thank you again. Until next time.